I told you to turn to Matthew chapter 5, and Zach, I'm still going to need you at the soundboard. Thank you. We're starting a new series today, and I'm titling it Divergent. And the word Divergent, some of you, especially the younger ones, first thing you'll think of when you hear that word is a movie series that was out a couple years ago. But it's a word that just means, kind of the opposite, going in an opposite way of where the way everything else is going. And Jesus seemed to do that a lot. He had what seemed to be some divergent thoughts. And you get to the parable, or not the parable, the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 5 and 6, and you start seeing a lot of times where he uses a phrase where he says, "You've heard it said, but I tell you." And it sounds like a divergent thing, but really what it is it's saying, I'm taking this further. I'm taking this further than the way you've understood it. And so I want to look at one of those ways here today in Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 21, where Jesus said, "You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to your brother or sister, Raka, is answerable,'" which, by the way, I just realized this as I was reading it. This was kind of a quasi-cuss word in their language. So every time a preacher reads this out loud, if we were in a time machine, everyone would think, "Why are you cussing in church?" But that's how harsh the word was. There is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. So Jesus addresses the commandment of murder, but he takes it to the next level and just talking about anger. And we're going to look at this here for a moment. And there's a few things. I'm just going to get into it today because instead of 3 points, I have 4. So I should just hurry up for your sake, right? The first one is that anger is actually a bigger thing, a bigger deal than you may think it is. Anger is a more important thing, not more important than murder. I don't want to mean that, but it's the way we categorize, the way we think of, the way we at times accept and allow anger to be part of our lives. It's actually a bigger deal than we think of. When Jesus said these words, you've heard said long ago to the people long ago, "You should not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." Which, if you're the original audience and you're hearing Jesus say that, you're like, "Whoa, wow, yikes!" Where's he going with this? And this week we were horrifically reminded that America does have a murder problem. We do. We've got a murder problem here. We watched it unfold in the most tragic of ways in that grade school down in Texas. 19 children murdered, 2 teachers murdered there. Rice Lake, Barron County, relatively speaking to so many other places in the country, and I'm sure that little town in Texas felt the same until this week also. Just some of the safest places to live in America. We're grateful for how safe it is to live here. But Jesus reminds us here that there's a root to murder that's prevalent in every state. We may feel safe from that kind of crime here, but there's another thing that's prevalent in every community, in every city, whether it's a major city, whether it's Rice Lake, whether it's Brill, around here at all. This problem is anger. Everybody deals with this. Everybody has this. The reality is that anger fuels every murder. It's behind every murder that takes place there. The young man who murdered so many in that grocery store in Buffalo, New York a few weeks ago. Anger was absolutely behind that. The young man who broke into the grade school in Texas, he was filled with anger. Now those are the big extreme cases, but even when it comes down to individual cases and the stories we've heard and the situations we know of, it was anger. Anger that was behind that in every case. But there's more. Jesus here, he's referring to the sixth commandment. You've heard it, but let me just show you here. Exodus 20:13. You shall not murder. Just simply referring to that. And that's a great commandment. And you might think, well, let's see. If you're having a religion and you're going to have a list of do's or don'ts, and that's a pretty elementary one. That's a pretty fundamental one that you're going to put in there. Let's tell you what, we're making our religion here. How about we put do not murder in there? That's a good idea. And I think if there was a committee on it, they say, yeah, let's do it. I don't think it'd be like, well, there was 6 yes and 4 no's on it. Everyone's in on that there. But Jesus takes the commandment further. Not just don't murder people, but also he says don't harbor anger against your brother and sister. You think about it, he's like, whoa, most people you and I know, I'd have to think really hard about anyone who I consider a friend, not just the close ones I'm with on a daily basis or a weekly basis, but maybe a little further out in the friend circle. I'd have to think really hard to think of if I have any friend who's committed murder. And maybe for most of you, that might be similar. Not just you, but the circle of people that you're around. You don't know anyone who's committed murder. Most of us haven't done that. But let me ask you this way: we should be proud of that we've obeyed the sixth commandment. But let me ask you this though: if we think of it this way, if you go your whole life obeying the commandment, you shall not murder. You go your whole life doing that. But never murdering anyone, never even threatening to kill anyone, but you are a person who's full of bitterness and anger and resentment towards others. How wonderful does that make your religion? You can say, I've never murdered anybody, but you're bitter and you're mean. And you've got people that are on a list in your head, in your heart, that you hate. You think, yeah, but I haven't murdered them. Man, if they died, I'd actually be kind of happy. What would that say about us? What would that say about this faith that we say that we have here? Is Jesus taking it too far? I don't think at all. I don't think I think he's finally, Jesus is saying, you know what, we want to tell you actually what we've been wanting to tell you all along about anger and murder here. Let's say it this way. God said I can't kill anyone, but he didn't say I can't be angry with them. He didn't say I couldn't resent them. God didn't say that I couldn't be bitter about what that person did to me. So God said it was okay for me to be angry and resentful for them. Would we really say that? If we're trying to convert somebody to Christianity, would we tell them that? Listen, you can't murder anybody, but you can hold a grudge. You know what? You can't murder anybody, but you can say some nasty things to them because of what you think about them. What kind of religion and what kind of God would that be if he told us not to murder, but he green-lighted anger and bitterness in us? I'll tell you what you'd have with that. You'd have a toxic, oppressive religion that wouldn't really be appealing to anybody. In any way here. I've never murdered anyone, but don't get on my bad side because I'll never forget what you've done to me. If it only makes sense that Jesus here would teach us, listen, you've heard it said, do not murder, but I'm telling you, don't even be angry. The judgment that is waiting for those who've murdered is the judgment that's waiting for those who have anger in their lives. And that's a problem. So then Jesus even does this. He talks about the sign of anger. And this is really similar in a way to, we're all familiar with the parable of the prodigal son, where Jesus said, love your neighbor. And then one of the Pharisees says, well, who's my neighbor? Because what they were really doing is saying, listen, let's refine it way down to a small list of people who are my neighbor. That's less people I have to love, less people I have to be nice to. And Jesus laid it all out. Basically, if they're breathing, they're your neighbor. That's who your neighbor is here. So Jesus then is saying here, well, don't be angry. You say, well, what would be anger? And we even do this Because many times as Christians, we felt like, it's not good to be angry, and it's not right to be angry. So we don't say we're angry. We say we're disappointed. Or sad. Or depressed. Are you angry? No, I'm just depressed right now. I'm just disappointed. It's a joke. It's actually a joke we say in our house. And somebody doesn't. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. And it's from some TV show or something. And it's taken as a joke in our house. But we do things like this, where we're trying to redefine it, what is really going on in our hearts and our minds, from what is really there. Anger. And Jesus here, he's going to tell you, here's the sign that you have anger towards somebody. And it's just in this verse here, verse 22. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in the danger of the fire of hell. What's he saying here? Come on now. Have you done this? Have you had somebody that you've had some lingering anger over in your life, and you come up with a nickname for them? And it's not a pleasant one. It's not a positive one. It's not an uplifting one. It's derogatory. It's meant to be derogatory. When you have reached a point in your life where you have a derogatory name for somebody, you've got anger. You've got anger about that person. When he says, Raka here is somebody who's empty-headed, somebody who isn't smart. And even though they're different words in the definition, I think if we were back in those days and knew spoke this as original language, we'd see the differentiation. In English, it kind of sounds like they kind of blend together. But even the word used, it's just one word for you fool there. It's moros. I think it's the word that we get the origin of where we get our word moron. Listen, every now and then, especially us guys, we might tease each other and call a guy, and guys know when it's in good nature. But when we say it and we got the little biting edge on it, this is the kind of thing that Jesus is talking about. When you got anger in your heart, when you've come up with the derogatory nickname for somebody. We've heard it. The couple who they're divorced now, and it was ugly and it was nasty, and you're friends with one of the two, maybe both, but you hear one of the two who they're still angry, they're still resentful about what the other one was in the marriage, and so they don't call them by their name. They've come up with another name for them, another nickname for them. Sometimes it's the couple who never got married, but maybe he had started a family and now they split up and it's ugly in that way. It's when we come up with the derogatory nickname for somebody, this is a really good sign you're holding on to anger in your life here that Jesus points out in this here. And let me just say this also. Let me just insert a current cultural moment that's going on in our society right now. As your pastor, I want to say to you lovingly and kindly here, I don't think it's appropriate for us as Christians to refer to our president as Brandon. Because everybody else knows there's another word that goes with it, where it all originated. This really isn't appropriate. If Christians are known for coming up with derogatory names for others, the Word of God tells us to pray for the king. And in this case, the president, to pray for them. And so it's not appropriate as Christians that we would refer to our president that way. I'm not telling you that the Bible tells you got to like him. The Bible doesn't tell you that. That's say, man, everything you're doing is great. The Bible, it doesn't matter who's president. There's always an element that doesn't care for the president. But it's not appropriate. It doesn't befit us. It doesn't befit those who call themselves children of the King. We don't want to be like that. So Jesus says, what are we going to do about it here? And he tells us that reconciliation has absolutely got to be a priority. Now he takes an interesting track on this, and you probably noticed it here. He says, don't be angry. And usually when we're angry, it's because we're the victim. We're on the receiving end of what somebody else has done to us. And if anyone needs to settle things, it's that person who's hurt us, not me, the angry one. And yet Jesus doesn't talk about the victim here at all. He talks about the one who's been victimized and what we should do. And he does it for a very important reason. But he shows us here in verse 23 and 24, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Now, why is Jesus taking the track of talking about you who've been, you the victimizer, who are doing it here, doing this because we can all relate to this. But he's got a few reasons for it here. One of them is Jesus turns it this way so we won't forget. First, he's saying, this is the beginning of him teaching the golden rule. Just simply this, and just 2 chapters later, Matthew, so in everything you do, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Haven't we all had some time where somebody offended us, somebody hurt us, somebody wounded us, and it just was lingering on for days and weeks, and no reconciliation between you and the one who hurt you? And haven't we all thought, if they just come and own it, if they just come and say, that was my fault. I'm sorry. I hurt you. I wronged you. If they would just come and do it and say it. You might even be honest, like, I know the hurt won't go away right away, but if they did, it would just help so much. Jesus is teaching the golden rule. Listen, if you have a hope in your heart that if you're wronged, that person, without you asking, without anyone prodding them, they would just have a heart, they would have a conscience, and they would come and just own it and apologize. I wish they would do that for me. So what? You know what? I will be that for whoever I may offend. I'll be that. I'll be the one who, you know what? If I had hurt somebody, I'd want them to come to me. So I know they're mad at me. I know I hurt them. And you might even think, is Jesus saying here, do you have to agree? Because this is the case sometimes. Sometimes we offend somebody and you're like, I don't really feel bad about it. Come on. We've thought that, like, man, you know what the problem is? They're oversensitive. Maybe they are. But that's not for you to deal with. That's with them and God. But we need to be the ones who are exemplifying the golden rule, that we would do unto others as we would have them do unto us. But the other thing is that God gave that example here. If you're offering your gift on the altar, he's giving the most elemental, he's giving a picture of the most elementary, fundamental act of worship that everyone who was listening to him would understand. You come to the temple, what are you doing? You're offering a sacrifice. In this case, he even said it's a gift. Because there can be that kind of worship too. There can be the offer the animals as sacrifice because you've got some sins that you need to acknowledge between you and God. And then there's also offerings you can bring as a gift. God, I just love you so much. I'm so grateful for what you've done in my life. So he's even talking about that. Oh, God, you've been so nice to me. He's like, if you even reach the point like you're next in line at the altar in the temple. The person in front of you, they're just finishing up, and now it's going to be your turn next to go and offer your gift. If you suddenly remember, there's that altercation I had with someone. He goes, just stop. Get out of line. Go and take care of that first. And in some cases, it might be like handing the rope to a friend. Hey, can you hold on to my goat for a few minutes here? I got to go talk to somebody. But why is he saying that here? He's saying it here. He says, listen, I don't want you hiding behind your religion when there are people who are angry with you. I don't want you hiding behind your religion. I don't want you, just going on with, thinking, oh, me and God, things are great. Things are wonderful here. Jesus talks about this here. Now, I've made my own parable. I've used my own example here, and I've used it before, but it fits so well here. Let me use it again. Just imagine this. Imagine you have a prince. He's a bachelor. He's the most eligible bachelor in the country. He's handsome. He's good looking. And let's just say he's the prince. Every single young lady in the nation would love to be picked by him. And there's And eventually along comes some gal. She wins his heart. And they get engaged. And they say, hey, 6 months from now is the big wedding day. And she's the lucky one that he's picked. And then as the months go by leading up to the wedding, it kind of starts to be rumors, and then it starts to be realized pretty much predominantly everywhere by everyone. She's mean. She's rude. She goes into a place of business, like, do you know who I am? And, expects to be treated special. And if she doesn't get the service she likes, she's just nasty and mean. And she's just the way she's treated people. And yet you watch Entertainment Tonight, and it shows them out on a date. And they're like, oh, look how wonderful. Look how he looks at her. He loves her. When they're together, they look so wonderful and the like. But yet, there keeps being these moments where people, they see how awful she is to other people. Everybody loved the prince. He was the best catch you could get in the nation. But after a while, they're like, he knows this, right? He knows how nasty and mean and rude she can be. He knows, right? Like, there's no way he doesn't know. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, people have pulled out their cell phones in the market, and they got video. It's been all over the internet. He has to have seen that. And then it just keeps going. Her behavior doesn't change. And then eventually, people can't help but start to think this. He knows. And if he's not saying anything to her, he must be okay with her being that way. And if he's okay with her being that way, he's a jerk too. And suddenly, this guy who they thought was so great, they don't think so great. Listen, there have been so many people over the years who got hurt by a Christian who never apologized. And they watch that Christian go to church, and they just seem to be blessed and happy and wonderful. And whatever hurt was done was deep and lasting in their heart. And they keep seeing, and they see him even go on and do wonderful things for the Lord. And they think like we think when we've been hurt. Hey, Lord, could you whisper in his ear with your Holy Spirit? You should apologize. You should own what you did to me. And they don't. And people start having a thought about God. And they start getting angry with God. They start getting resentful towards God. They see, they keep going to God, and as near as I can tell, what it seems to me, like God's okay with how they treated me. God's okay with them being a jerk to me. God's okay with them being hurtful to me. You know what? I didn't like them, and now the more I think about it, I don't like God either. Do you know people things have gone that far in their mind? Well, let me tell you something here. Jesus is showing us in this scripture. He's saying it so loud and so clear to us that we should never think that. He's showing us here that God has said, I'm not okay with it. I told them, stop coming to worship until you've gone and settled it. I'm not okay with how they done. So and this is the thing that happens when we have anger. Anger always has a direction. When we have anger in our hearts, it's going to get aimed at someone or something, and it's not too rare that anger, even we're angry at the one who hurt us, and then after a while, if it remains unresolved, it then gets directed at God. But God wants you to know here, please, please, please hear His word here today. That if you see that one who they're a Christian and they hurt you, and it looks like they're just them and God, they're just good. Like God's like, don't think that. Don't think I'm okay with it. I told them not to come to me. They haven't listened to my word. But don't take the anger you have towards them and think that I'm like that prince in the story I just related to you. He's not. He's not. He's saying, though, listen, reconciliation has to be a priority in all of us. And here's the thing that keeps us, there's several things that keep us from reconciling with somebody who we've offended, hurt. Sometimes it can be ego. So I was kind of joking a few moments ago when I said sometimes like, well, it's not that I was a jerk, it's just that they're hypersensitive. They got to get over themselves. Well, maybe they are hypersensitive, but your attitude about their hypersensitivity isn't very kind either. So that might be part of it. And so you got to be honest about how kind you are with somebody's weakness. And you not apologizing isn't, God didn't declare you to be the one. You know what? They needed someone to be kind of rough with them there, so maybe they finally learn to stop being hypersensitive. Who told you were the teacher? Okay, so we need to be humble in that. In there, we need to obey God's word. And so one of the other reasons we don't come and apologize, we don't come and reconcile is fear. Because in private, quiet moments, even in our head, we're like, man, I own up to that, man. Then I'm kind of letting it out in the open for what I did, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Isn't it amazing? We got all our video cameras and surveillance everywhere nowadays. Isn't it amazing when you see the video of somebody who goes to a convenience store and shoots at somebody? Maybe they hit them, maybe they don't. But then they run. You got a gun. Why are you running? Fear. Suddenly, as soon as they pull the trigger, they're terrified. Because they're terrified of what they'll lose, their freedom. And it's just a smaller scale, but it's kind of similar. If we're going to go and apologize, we're terrified of what we may lose. We have to put ourselves in the mercy of God. But God is telling us here is that Jesus told us here in this, listen, we have a responsibility by God to reconcile. And we need to do that. We need to do that. And it needs to be a priority in our lives. So here's one more in this, is that you need to, and here, just to drive the point home, Jesus tells us here, we need to do what we can while we still can. Do what we can while we still can. Because delayed apologies, the longer we delay apologizing, the longer we delay reconciling things, the more expensive the price is. I said a moment ago, why do we hold off sometimes on reconciling and apologizing? Because of fear, and that fear is the cost what it'll cost us to own up to what we did. But God tells us here in His Word that the longer we go, there is interest accruing on it. It just keeps getting more costly the longer we go. Jesus shows here, verse 25 and 26, says, settle matters quickly with your adversary. And I think, in fact, he's kind of talking about two different groups of people. The first one was like a friend. But now there's an adversary. So with your adversary who is taking you to court, he's not even talking about, listen, if you're innocent. He says, even if you think you're innocent, you need to settle it. He goes, do this while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you pay the last penny here. Jesus is simply warning us here. There is only so long you can delay things. You can't delay them forever. Well, when we are in the delay phase of a disagreement, things are still in our control. When you still have the opportunity for you to go and settle, for you to go to apologize, for you and go and reconcile it, things are still in your control. As scared as you may be about doing it, and sometimes that's the other fear, that's the other part of fear, is that we got our fear in our heart of going and apologizing and how it's just going to bust loose and then I'm really going to be out of control of this situation. Not as bad as if it goes all the way to court in this case. And court can be literal court, but it can also end up in the court of public opinion. We need to do something while we can still do something. And Jesus uses this example of things getting so bad that the person who's offended finally says, that's it, I'm taking you to court. I'm tired of waiting for you to do the right thing. And so we're going to go to court, and I believe I'm going to win this case, and then they're going to force you to do the right thing. And he said, you can always, even to this day, you can always settle a lawsuit before it starts. And sometimes even here, you can settle a lawsuit while you're in the middle of it. Finally, you can be in the middle of the lawsuit and say, all right, let's just settle. We can do that here. But what Jesus urges us to do here is that once you're in court, you're no longer in control. you no longer get a say in the outcome. And that's the point he's saying. Listen, you need, and I need to reconcile. If we've offended somebody, if we've hurt somebody, we need to reconcile while we still get to choose to do it. Because eventually, things will get to the point where you don't get to choose. Things will get to the point where not only do you not get to choose, you are told what you will do. And let's just think about right now. Do you think it's going to be less than what you could have done if you'd done it on your own? It's always more costly. It's always more dear to you. So Jesus is saying, listen, this is how much your priority be. Take care of it while you can still take care of it. Because if not, somebody will force you to take care of it, and it will cost you. It will cost you so dearly. You don't want to do that. You know, you don't want to be at the mercy of all that. In fact, this isn't his words, this is my words here. It's almost like he's saying, listen, if you think it's okay to go to court and not settle before you get there, you're a gambler. And here's what I mean by it. Now, I'm not saying Jesus said this, that's my word, but let's go back and look at this verse here. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Yeah, it may not turn out for you, but you know what? Once you get to court, and you settle on the way, I'll go to court. Why don't you just pull out the dice and roll some dice? Why don't you come up with some other game of chance as an analogy, as a metaphor here. But, you can't guarantee the outcome for you. Whereas you have so much better opportunity for a good outcome if you choose to settle before somebody else forces you to. Don't gamble with it. Because he says in that next verse, you may be thrown into prison and not get out till you pay the last penny. Here's just a kind of ironic thought with that. If you're in prison, how are you paying anything off? What are you doing to earn anything, to pay anything off? In other words, you're going to end up in a situation where now you never get out. And you had the choice. I had the choice to settle beforehand with all this. We don't want to do that. So, do I have it here? Julie, I tell you, you will not get out until you've paid the last penny. Jesus is just driving it so home to us here. We need to be people that anger is dealt with in our lives, that anger is confronted. When, many of you know, not everybody in the room knows this, we were the youth pastors here for 7 or 8 years, late 90s up until about 2005, and then we went down and pastored in the Chicago area for 5 years. And then in 2010, we came back as the pastors. And one of the things, I tell people this story many times here, is that there's many cultural differences between living in Barron County, Wisconsin, and living in the Chicago area there. And one of them was just this, is that, and it really hit me in the face hard for, in particular, the first year I lived down there. In Barron County, Wisconsin, I heard this phrase, I lost count of times I heard this phrase, when someone is upset or angry with someone else, you don't hear the conversation of them talking to each other. What you hear is the angry one saying to you later, oh, I almost said something. In Chicago, I lost count of times I heard that. In Chicago, it was hitting me hard in the face where people would say to me, Pastor, let me just tell you something. And they just tell me. And it felt, because I was so acclimated to Barron County, Wisconsin, of people not settling things, of not going and reconciling. I was so acclimated to that I wasn't used to somebody, a culture where they just say, Pastor, let me just tell you something. Does it feel harsh at first? Every time I was like on the inside, I'm like, oh, geez, lay off me. Take it easy on me. And I'm supposed to be a grown man, but on the inside, I'm like, oh, uncle, But after about a year of it, I realized, you know what? They actually, it feels harsh at the beginning of it, but after a while you start realizing, no, they don't want stuff between us. They don't want things lingering on. Let's just get it out. Let's get it settled. Because what I experienced after that was you get the harsh of, hey, let me just tell you something. And they just get it out. And it might, hit you hard and be a little humbling in the moment. But then you start realizing in the days and weeks following, what's your friendship with that person? What's your relationship with them? It's pretty good. It's actually pretty healthy. We still like each other. In fact, we still have a friendship. In fact, we got a better friendship now because he was loving enough, he was kind enough to say to me, let me just tell you something. And do that. It's a gift. It's a kindness you do to everyone involved when we do that. It's so not Barron County here. It's not. It's not a part of who we are here. But you know what? Just because that's what our culture is here doesn't mean this is the culture of who the family of God is. And the family of God needs to be a culture of people that if we have offended anybody, we go and we reconcile. Why? Because that's the golden rule. If someone had hurt me, I would want them to apologize. Therefore, if I have, and sometimes I've done that with those, I'm thinking, I don't think I did something, but I'm kind of getting a vibe off that person. I get around them and, there's just something radiating from them about me. And so I'll even go to them, listen, have I done something to offend you or hurt you? Sometimes the answer is no. Every now and then, well, yeah, there is. And so we deal with it. But it's a gift. It's a wonderful gift. Because otherwise, anger held on to just turns toxic. Anger held on to is not how God wants us to be. Because eventually, anger, you may not have done the physical act, but anger in our heart grows to the point like, I wish you were dead. And what's the difference between actually killing somebody and wishing they were dead as far as in your heart? You've done the deed. And God doesn't want our hearts there. Let's bow our heads. Father,